Hi, Debra.
Hey, how are you today? Are you excited to be interviewed today?
I am. Yeah. I'm very excited. I don't know what you're going to ask me about, so that's part of the surprise.
Well, it's a secret and a surprise.
Yes.
Well, welcome everybody to today's episode of the Psychology of Wellbeing, and we are taking a deep dive into how to create a thriving relationship. All of us need some thoughts and advice, and we have an expert here that's going to share some great information. And before I introduce her, I want to introduce our sponsor for this series, CoSpace. So if you have watched a previous episode, you know who they are, and they're doing a fantastic job creating spaces for people with clinical license and professional practices to come in and meet with their clients. So whether you're a massage therapist or a counselor or any type of practitioner that needs that great, beautiful design sort of space, CoSpace is a great choice. Check them out for sure. Now, I'm super excited to introduce you to Linda Domenitz, who is a clinical psychologist and also licensed in family and marital therapy. Did I get that right? Licensed?
Yes, it's LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapy. We put the marriage before the family.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, mine didn't really roll out that way, but that's a different story.
Okay.
So yes, we are going to talk all about thriving relationships, and I've put a lot of thought into this. Obviously, I'm 52 years old, so I have a few under my belt, starting in high school, college, marriage, divorce, single, dating. And one of the things that I know is really important is to really understand who you are when you come into a relationship. What are your thoughts on what we can do, especially if we're on the brink of entering a new relationship? What are the things that we can do in contemplation about ourselves, in thinking about how do I help, how do I build a healthy relationship?
Well, you certainly hit the first important thing, which is, as you said, to know who you are, know yourself. Many people enter into a partnership and they themselves are not fully aware of what their values are, what's important to them. They haven't really thought about that. And then all of a sudden, now in a living arrangement with someone else, all of a sudden they begin to recognize, hey, there are differences here. And how do we navigate those differences? And can we navigate those differences? So you put your finger right on the pulse.
Yes. Well, it's funny because obviously I've matured over time, but I can remember when I was younger, I think I was always looking more for what am I going to get out of this relationship? Like, what needs are they fulfilling? Or more importantly, what are they not fulfilling? Because that's where I wanted to put the majority of my focus on, what was wrong with them. Why aren't they making me happy?
Yes.
So is that pretty common? Is that a pretty common thing in relationships?
It's so common. Yeah, you're an expert, Debra. I can tell already. First of all, that you hear that all the time. We're sort of ego focused when we get into a relationship, and the unspoken contract really is, in my opinion, when we're standing at the altar, we haven't had the conversation with each other about, how do I expect you to make up for what my mother and father didn't do for me? And how do you expect me to make up for what your mother and father, assuming you had, parents, what they didn't do for you? That conversation never takes place. And yet, I think it's critical that answering that question by itself can save people a lot of heartache. But it's unconscious. It's unconscious. And so we wind up with our partner, and then there are disappointments. And when we start, we become disillusioned. And
now I see the real you now that we're married.
Right. But it's just like what you said. We start to look at our partner and say, hey, how are you not meeting my needs? And what we're not aware of, without help usually, is that those needs are based really on very young needs from our childhood that were unmet in our childhood. And we carry them into adulthood. And then we get married to somebody or we partner with somebody, and the unspoken expectation is that this person is going to know what those needs are and is going to meet them. And it's mutual. And that's when the disappointment begins.
Do you think that we are, like, when you think about a chemistry or an attraction to a certain person, in your experience, because you work with so many couples, do you think we're attracted more to those people that are going to trigger those things within us? So let's say I had a father who was aloof and distant and didn't show me love and affection. Am I going to be drawn to a man in a partnership who will, I think, unconsciously, like you said, is going to fulfill that particular need?
Well, I can tell that you are an experienced person, because that question, yes, you're absolutely, that's a great question. We almost have radar for this kind of thing. It's not a conscious thing, but we are looking for that person because, and if you think about it, I like to think about this with compassion, because there is an unmet emotional need that we have. And that's nobody's fault. It's the way it happened. But we're not aware that we do hope that our partner is going to meet that need. And we know exactly how to find the exact right partner that's going to trigger the problem.
Yeah.
And then when we're saddled with that situation, we don't know what to do with it, unfortunately. And often what happens is time moves on and we become angry and disappointed. And that grows and grows and grows, and we don't know how to address it. And then we say, oh, we have so much water under the dam. Maybe we get help at that point, but often it's too late and too little. So if we had this understanding earlier on, we could do a lot of damage control.
And do you think how each person, like, let's say, because some of it is like myself, my sense of self, like how I feel about myself, how I talk about myself, my sense of self-worth. So if I'm not in a place of like unconditionally loving myself, is it even possible that I can create a space in which a partner can come in and experience that as well?
$1 million question. I would answer you this way. The more that you speak to yourself with kindness and understanding, the more likely you're going to address the bumps in your relationship as bumps and not boulders. I would say it's true of your partner. The more able your partner is able to speak to herself or himself with kindness, understanding, and compassion, then that's going to get extended to you. And they also, when there are bumps in the road, there'll be bumps in the road. They won't be boulders. They won't dysregulate everybody. And your ability to overcome whatever difficulties are presented is much more likely. The ability to talk about whatever is going on will be much more likely, because if you speak to yourself in this way, you're likely to be a person who has a greater sense of safety and trust. And those two things are extremely important in any relationship that's an important one, even with an employer and an employee, but certainly in a marriage. Those security, trust, and safety are really essential to a healthy marriage.
And as soon as you said that, I just kind of did a spiral back and thought about some of the different relationships I was in, and I know exactly what dynamic you're talking about. So if you're in a partnership with somebody and you reach that uncomfortable moment, but then you either avoid conflict because you know somebody's going to erupt, or you come about it in a different way to try to manage it. Or, I've been in relationships where I know I may not say it right, or it may not come out right, or maybe I sound accusing, but I'm not meaning to sound that, but it lands in a safer space because that person is more emotionally evolved, it's like, I see the total difference in what you're talking about between, because we're all going to hit, like you said, those pebbles or those boulders, and what space is created around those to, knock them down so they're not blocking your path anymore is very dependent on whether you feel safe in being yourself and communicating and trying to get it out, even if you don't do it perfectly.
Right. And if you're not able to do that, the pattern that usually gets set up is one partner tends to pursue and the other partner tends to withdraw. And then the more you pursue, the more they withdraw, the more they withdraw, the more you pursue. That's a very common pattern when you're not able to really have a conversation about what is needed to be talked about. And the other pattern is that sometimes the person who's pursuing gets burnt out and then both people withdraw and there's very little energy happening there. And then you kind of drift apart and it just, before you know it, there's nothing left. So if we understood more about what to do when we're in those patterns and recognize them, then you can begin to try to turn that around.
And I would think, from a physical perspective, when you were talking about pursuing and withdrawing, at first I thought, well, maybe men tend to be more the pursuer and women are the withdrawal. But then I thought, women tend to come in more at the emotional level and want to, that energy's coming in, wanting to connect with a man. And then actually I sense like a men withdrawing, because I read a book, I think it was called The Mask of Masculinity, and it talked about, how men and boys are raised, and often they're not as emotive and they don't get together with their girlfriend or their guy friends and, talk and share everything. And so do you see a trend in women pursuing and men withdrawing?
I actually look at this very anthropologically. If you think about the origin of the sexes, what men needed to do in order to survive and what women needed to do in order to survive, men needed to keep their cards close to their vest pocket. They in order for them to benefit their families, they had to be competitive with one another. They had to be quiet, secretive. They couldn't give their information to other people because it would interfere with their ability to compete. And women were back at the homeland or the cave. They had to become more interdependent because they were all back there together. And while all of this happened quite a while back, I think we are still dealing with the evolution of our beginnings. But to answer your question, I think you see women who are withdrawers also, but it is more common, at least in my practice, to see, as you said, to see mostly the women pursuing and the men withdrawing, because most men have the idea that by withdrawing, they're actually making things better. And if they were to stay and be in conversation, that it would develop into conflict and hostility. And so most men who withdraw are doing it for a positive reason from their perspective, but that's not how the women who are pursuing experience it. And the women experience it as they're being neglected and dismissed, and the withdrawing partner has all the power. So there's a misunderstanding about what's going on, but each party is doing what they're doing as a way to help themselves feel safer. But it's not understood by each one. The withdrawer is feeling attacked by the pursuer,
right?
And the pursuer is feeling neglected and dismissed by the withdrawer. But both parties are actually doing what they know to do based on what they think is going to bring safety and security.
How do, like, for somebody listening who maybe, isn't quite ready to seek out therapy or couples counseling, what are some things that somebody could do who's listening to this and says, wow, you know what, that really resonates with my marriage? what are some things that they can do to maybe disrupt that pattern? Because what I see when you're saying that is probably years of patterning that's happening. Pursue, pull away, until it at some point it's probably going to break. So
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because let's say it's most likely that the pursuer in the partnership is going to be the one who's going to want to bring this forward to the withdrawing partner, with this withdrawing partner.
And the withdrawer is going to go, oh, I don't want to do that.
Exactly. You already know that the withdrawing partner is going to react just as you did. So it's a tricky one, and it really requires that the pursuer have some see if the pursuer can get the idea that your withdrawing partner is not doing that to be nasty to you or angry or dismissive, but from their perspective, that's really what they think is most helpful to do. It's possible the pursuer could be the one to say to the other party, could we just make some space with each other to talk about some of the things we like about each other? I would say you kind of want to start from a positive place and see if you can build some positive energy, because what happens is if this goes on long enough, it becomes like a stamp book that gets filled up, and now the book is full and you're going to cash the book in for a prize. And that's what we don't want to have happen.
Is the prize called divorce?
Yeah, that could be, well, I'm angry enough now. Yes, I'm angry enough now. I have enough stamps in the book that I can now cash the book in, and maybe, yes, like you say, that could mean, okay, now I can justify a divorce. So I think if someone can have the awareness that they care about the relationship and they want to engage their partner, you have to start from someplace positive. And can you find the generosity of spirit to remember what it is that attracted you into the beginning, to remind yourself of what you like about this person, and to see if you can, make some space and time to focus on that. Because you have to build up you kind of have to fill the basket with something before you unravel it. It's a lot. If you want to tell somebody, in my experience, if you want to help somebody change their behavior, what we know is it's always good to begin the conversation with telling them something you like about them. Right?
Yeah.
I really appreciate how you just did those dishes last night. I didn't have to say anything to you, and I was so tired, and I'm really grateful that you did that. And then after you've done that, then, and there's something I would like to talk to you about when you have time, something that concerns me. And then when you do have that conversation, the other important thing is to make I statements instead of you statements.
I was just going to go there, because I was going to say probably the way that you enter into the conversation, even if it starts out pretty.
Yeah.
If it starts out pretty, but then you start saying, well, you did this, or you didn't do that, or you did that, the whole dynamic will shift.
Right. And not only will it shift, but the next time you say something positive, they may anticipate that, wait, what's going to fall now?
Yeah. So she's starting with honey, but she's got a hammer in the other hand.
Exactly right. So the idea is you're trying to set up, because the withdrawer doesn't want to communicate, and you know that already. So you're trying to create a positive situation. And then when you want to talk about what your concern is, again, going back to no pointing the finger, no blaming and shaming. There's a technique that I use when I do therapy that I have found very successful. And you talk to both people about wanting to have better communication, and you say to them, we're going to set this up so that there will be no blaming or shaming between the two of you. And you're going to permit me, if it's okay with you, to be your coach in case you fall into that pattern. With your permission, I'm going to ask if I can stop that so that I can get you back on track. And most people agree to allow me to do that. And then what happens is each party is coached on how to speak to their partner, and the other one is coached on how to listen. And they have 3 minutes, so it doesn't go on forever. And you pick something that's, an issue between them. And so first one person speaks for 3 minutes without shaming or blaming the partner. And then the other person who's been the listener has the opportunity to ask questions about what their partner said, if there was anything they didn't understand. And then that person then tells the partner what they understood from what they shared. And then they have a way to check to see if that person's listening was accurate. So there's a way for them to check with each other. And then once that happens, the other partner then has the chance to speak. And that, I use that a lot clinically. And if people could do that.
And you interrupt, like, will you, if let's say you're setting up this sort of communication paradigm.
Yeah.
And then one of the partners gets off track, do you interrupt and redirect before it gets too far, or do you kind of let them?
No, I interrupt, but I always set the situation up in advance so that we've discussed that. Okay. And I asked their permission. I said, if you get off track, will it be okay for me to interrupt you? I don't want to be disrespectful to you.
Yes.
So is it going to be okay if I signal you and say we need to get back on track? And of course they agree to it. If they don't agree to it, we're not going to do this. But the practice of this kind of behavior, this kind of conversation, where what we're doing is creating a very safe place for them to talk to each other. It's very controlled. They're also told that after they leave, they have to agree not to use anything that we talked about as ammunition against each other. That has to be an agreement as well.
Now that Linda's not here, you're going to get it.
Right, exactly. It sounds like you know all the hot spots. I can tell you've been there.
Yeah,
either that or you're hanging out with a lot of therapists.
Well, it's just I am actually a person who will do a lot of self-work. So I figure if a relationship, or even if it's dating or whatever it is, when it ends, that you're potentially going to enter your next one exactly where that one failed. So I actually purposely will work in some space, spend time in reflection, and try to identify where I screwed up, basically. Like what was I not bringing to this connection, or what did I, whatever. But it's almost like we'll do this for our entire lives, because, I just, even a few days ago, I got a little heated with somebody who's really dear to me. And, there's my side and their side. And in the silence, I said, well, this person is not feeling supported by me. That's what they're feeling. So that wasn't my intention. And I can get all on a high horse and say, well, you're overreacting or whatever. But at the end of the day, they were feeling unsupported by me. So I decided to come back into the conversation with that understanding, and then, try to create a space for them to communicate what they felt, because these things can get out of whack really quickly.
Yes, they can. How did that go, Debra?
So we actually didn't talk for a couple days, and that's the space I use to reflect. And I think it's always good to add in space, like to not just keep hammering and hammering and hammering. And because when your emotions are elevated, I don't know that you can reach resolution always. So I think space is always good. And I try to use that time to say, okay, let me just step back from what I'm feeling and try to think about what they're feeling. And so I came to that realization that I think she felt unsupported by me.
Yeah. Well, you said something very, very important. You said a few very important things. One is you recognize the value of the spaciousness and how important that is. And
Yeah.
and there's actually a neuroscientific reason that that's true. Because when we're activated, we are actually in a primitive brain. We're in the primitive part of the nervous system. And that's not the part of the nervous system that we want to be using when we're having these kinds of interactions. We want to be using the higher brain, which we now call the prefrontal cortex. And in order to access that higher brain, we have to do exactly what you said. We have to create space and reflect. So that's number one. Very, very important. And getting back to your question earlier about what can people do, I would say that's a very good idea right there. Then you did the next important thing, which was you looked at yourself, which was very important that you were able to do that. And then you did the third thing, which is really important, very important. And many people don't do this. You thought about it from her point of view. And that's really what I call compassion, the ability to stand in the shoes of the other person and try to understand the experience from their point of view. That is very, very critical to healthy relationships. And it's not something we easily come by. And it goes back to what I said originally. The more that we learn to speak to ourselves kindly, the more we're going to be likely to do exactly what you did in that third step. All of those steps you took were really positive steps in relationship building.
So my next relationship is going to be fantastic.
Well, let's just say that if you've got those three things down, you have a major, major head start in success. And if you pick somebody who has the same ability as you do, you're off to you both become professors of this.
That's good.
Yeah. But you just demonstrated a lot of impressive self-knowledge in terms of knowing those are the three important steps: to step back, to self-reflect. I would just say to be kind with yourself about what happened, and then to take that next step of putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. And then you did the next thing, which was you allowed space even after that. Right?
Yeah, because we didn't talk on the phone for 2 days. We talked on the phone for the first time today, and it was light. So it was. I'm wondering. You can, as a counselor, you can tell me, like, is this something I should address with her directly now, or just, we're kind of back to normal. But is it something I should say? Hey, I just really want to take a moment to talk about, what happened a few days ago. And one of the things I see is I think you probably felt unsupported by me. And I just want to say that wasn't my intention.
Yeah, well, I like that very much. I might say, I'd like to check something out with you. I know we had this interaction and this happened. And when I reflected on it, I was imagining that you were feeling unsupported, but I don't want to make that assumption because I don't want to, work out of a story that may not be correct. So I'd like to be able to check that out with you. Would that be okay?
Yeah. And I would say that took me a long time to be able to get to that space, because I can remember in my 20s and 30s, just I got to be a good leaver, like, oh, fine, I'll just leave, whether it was a job, a marriage, a boyfriend, it would build up to a certain place, and then I'll be like, it's not worth it, I'm just going to leave. But
Right. Well, that's that. Now you're mentioning another very important variable. There's a certain, importance to maturity in this. I mean, most of us are not going to be able to communicate like this, like you said, maybe in our 20s. Maybe it takes some personal growth, and maybe it also takes some falling down and making mistakes and feeling the pain of that. Which then motivates us to become more mindful about all these things. So the point is that, you know, the marital trajectory should involve growth for both people. And that can become tricky because sometimes one partner is growing and another is not. And how you handle that.
I hear that a lot. Like I hear one partner say, you know, I changed, I expanded myself, I went here, I did this, and then the other partner just kind of, you know, stayed where they were. So they really outgrew each other a little bit.
Right.
What are your thoughts on, like, what are the signs when counseling's not going to work? Like this, I need to acknowledge that this relationship is over. What are some of the symptoms of that?
Good sign. Good question. Again, I would say if one person in the relationship seems very unmotivated to do anything, to talk about, you know, what's going on, or to go for help. If someone is chronically functioning outside the relationship, either with an extramarital situation or with a substance abuse, alcohol and drug use is very much like having a extramarital partner. The substance abuse is like the love object, and there's a way in which that person is missing in action from the marriage. Obviously, if there's tremendous hostility between two people and they cannot find peace, just things become like a roommate situation, and we're going through the motions and we're living together, but there's no juice.
Yeah.
You know, or if there's a tremendous values, you know, a clash, whether it's about sexuality, whether it's about religion, lifestyle, you know, something that makes it, you know, sometimes one partner wants to have a child, the other one says out of the question, and, you know, that becomes a deal breaker.
Yeah. You just said the exact word I was thinking, because in my head, when I go into a relationship now, you almost learn what your deal breakers are from the one previous, you know? So
yes.
Like, you know some of your deal breakers no matter what. But then you meet somebody, you start to get to know each other, you forge a connection, and then all of a sudden up comes a deal breaker. And you're like, I didn't really know that was a deal breaker, but that's definitely a deal breaker. So I think just spending time on those too, like when you're writing out your dating profile, I write this separately, like privately. I don't put this anywhere, but it's like I know the things that I'm looking for, and I know my deal breakers, at least the ones to this point. And I write them out and I look at them and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then I tend to attract that type person, you know? When you're clear.
What's that?
When you're clear on, you know, who you are and what you're looking for, that's weed through the layers quicker.
Well, that's when you're capable of having what we call a conscious relationship. And that's really, you know, what we all hope for, I think, a conscious relationship.
Yeah. Well, I could obviously talk about this for hours, and you probably could too, because that's what you do for a living. But do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to share? And then obviously I want to let people know what you do and how you work with people and how to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Your closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I think the thing that I hold closest to my heart in all of this work is I feel tremendous compassion for people as they are in the struggle. And I'm grateful to have a pair of eyes that really does not look at people as damaged or impaired or as deserving of blame or shame. I think I strive very much to look at the context of why people are behaving the way they are. And I can tell you that most often when I start digging, I can always find some good reason for whatever is surfacing. Even with one of the most difficult situations to treat are people who suffer from narcissism.
Yeah.
But I would even say to you, I have never met somebody narcissistic that didn't have a good reason for being narcissistic. So I think, I kind of have an anthropological lens about this, and I'm always looking for, how did this person arrive where they are? What brought them here? And surprisingly, the other thing that's a real big surprise for most people when I work with them is often I'm able to help them recognize that the very thing that they come in complaining about in themselves turns out to be some kind of protection for them from earlier in their life. And when they can recognize that, they are able to release their feelings about it and unburden themselves, and they begin to get renewed and replenished. And it's tremendously healing. It's counterintuitive for most of us to realize that what we need to do is not move away from our suffering, but come closer to it. And that when we are able to come closer to it with compassion and understanding, that's when we are most able really to unburden ourselves. And if each person in a partnership embraces that kind of practice, there's tremendous reason to have hope, even even when there's been tremendous hostility and challenges that they've faced. So I think hope is very important, having a hopeful perspective. And like I said, always looking for what's underneath the behavior and trying to make sense of it instead of having the person feel wrong or bad. Yeah. And just holding space for that kind of compassionate understanding of our shared humanity. I just find that to be an essential part of working with the folks that I work with. And I try to bestow that upon them and hope that they will carry that with them.
You have a very calm and soothing, but scientific demeanor almost, that I'm sure makes your clients feel very safe and comfortable and trusting, because they have to trust you as their guide as they start to really explore this process. But where are you based, just so people know where you're based once they can get out physically? And then do you do telemed as well?
Well, I'm actually I was first licensed working in Connecticut, and I had to come down to Florida to take care of a family member. Okay. So I became licensed in Florida. Right now I'm in Aventura.
Okay.
But essentially I'm doing most of the practice online at this point. Okay.
And this is your website, Linda,
yes.
Domenitz, LMFT.com. Yep. And is that the best form of contact for people to reach out to you?
Actually, the best way for them to reach me is actually by my phone, which is 860-966-9718.
Okay.
And they can text me or call me there.
Okay, perfect. Well, it sounds like you will be a great resource, and I'm sure you've done incredible work in helping people not only see themselves in a different light, but also thrive more in their relationships. So thank you so much for joining us today on our Psychology of Wellbeing show.
Debra, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I could say you could be my co-pilot.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and stay tuned for our next episode of Psychology of Wellbeing, which will be coming to you on Facebook and YouTube on Thursday evenings. Take care.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.